The Cerebral Entertainment Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to yet another riveting edition of the Cerebral Entertainment Podcast. I am James, and with me, as always, is my good friend Colt.
Absolutely.
And on the line with us today for part 3 of our series, Austin Stout. Austin, good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me, putting up with me for 3 weeks now.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yep.
2 weeks in a row, even.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We just watched some videos from the barn gym. I guess I was the leg training this morning.
Yeah, I just got done training a couple hours ago.
So my question is, in an hour or so, when we get up, how hard is that going to be?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll try not to think about it. Yeah, it's more like the drunken haze my nervous system is in for like the next hour after I train.
Right.
It's funny because the guy that came and trained with me, he's like, dude, you sound like you're just intoxicated. Like you can't put together a sentence by the end of the workout. Just like slurring my words.
Yeah.
Guess that's a good thing though, right?
Yeah. As long as you recover enough. Tomorrow's off day. I won't train tomorrow. So we'll just, it'll be all emails and all that fun stuff.
So how do you set up your off days and stuff like that? Just whenever you think you need it, or do you have a basic plan put together?
Yeah, it's almost the same every week, just because just how it works with my schedule. At least lately, it will vary. It will vary a little bit, but I normally train on the weekends, most weekends, just because if I'll have work stuff to do, like make a plan or some emails and stuff, but it's way heavier during the week. You know what I mean? So it's like I only really want to train a couple times during the week. I have more time to just focus on the work stuff. So it's normally Saturday, Sunday train. Then I'll train 2 other days during the week, Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, something like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't help but notice how massive that your legs have gotten over recent time. You got some huge legs, man. It's like tree trunks.
I've actually had pretty okay leg genetics. But I mean, I trained them like super crazy hard, obviously. So, and I tore my hamstring about 8 weeks ago, which I don't know if you guys saw that online, that big black and blue photo I posted with my torn hamstring.
Right.
Yeah, it was. But knock on wood, so far I've been reintroducing everything's been okay. I haven't squatted. We did do some leg presses today, like a slow tempo, nice and controlled leg press. It seems to be okay. And no issues with it really. I have a pretty good doctor that deals with like muscular injuries or joint tendon, ligament type injuries and stuff. So he did some PRP injection on my hamstring, which I'm sure that had to have sped it up because I was shocked how fast it healed.
Nice.
So,
good.
So that was how long ago? When did that happen?
It's not even, New Year's Eve.
Dang.
So less than, like what, not even 8 weeks quite, maybe.
Ish.
And and I mean, I push the leg curls and stuff as hard as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And the leg press, I mean, it's not like super crazy heavy, but it's decently heavy. And I pushed it pretty hard. And he told me everything looked good on my follow-up. He does ultrasound to look for muscle tears and stuff in there. So he's like, everything healed up super fast. He said that the PRP can cut your healing time down by like half.
That's crazy.
And a lot of people. So,
very sweet.
Nice.
Man, we've got you on the line today to kind of finish up this series, and our topic is one that's definitely got my interest piqued, and I know it will for a lot of people. And that's the psychological consequences of fitness, or we've mentioned the consequences or the side effects. So, you can wrap it up in a nice bow and call it results. But there are a lot of different areas in the psychological aspects of fitness, that a lot of different rabbit holes we could go down. So if you don't mind, why don't you start us off with what you've got in mind about what it means when we say the psychological consequences of fitness?
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways, little directions that could branch off in, but I think we could definitely look around and probably see certain personality types that kind of gravitate towards the more extremes, right? Your person that's not very well organized or kind of fly by the seat of their pants type of person's probably not going to be a super dedicated bodybuilding type, right? Because it's just not. It probably doesn't really appeal to them that much. I mean, the idea might sound good, but the actions of doing it probably aren't very appealing, right? And then you have some other people that are just kind of right at home with that structure and redundancy and repetition. So those types of people also tend to have other personality traits that you're probably going to see in their lifetime, and you can amplify that to real big extremes like OCD, right? So we can take someone that kind of has this type A personality, and we put them in a structured lifestyle that is works good for them. It works good for them because they have control. They micromanage, right? They micromanage their food and their schedule and their training and so on and so forth. But inevitably over time, they want more and more control, and they don't always have control of everything. So there are times when we don't have control that it gives them anxiety, right? So anxiety or stress, and it causes them to just feel very uncomfortable. So what we end up with is somebody that is over managing their variables, and they just end up with this really bad, you call it like a bad relationship with, whether it be with food or the whole lifestyle in general. And it's something that manifests over time. I mean, you'll see other, good example would be like, I've seen people that were maybe like former drug addicts or had former eating disorders or something, and they gravitate towards bodybuilding, and those people almost always gravitate towards the more extreme side, right? When we're talking like very specific managing details,
right?
Because all they're doing is really just trading one habit for another, right? And it's meant to fill that void in a more healthy manner, which initially it does. I mean, initially it's obviously like, I'd much rather see someone lift weights and weigh their food than use opiates every day.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Obviously. But at the same time, you can definitely get comfortable and kind of fall into that really obsessive like stronghold that this lifestyle can put you into. And you're almost to the point where they can't do anything else, and their whole life is basically run by this, right? So that can be, these people can end up over exercising or doing things that are too extreme and actually damaging their body. We talked about all these hormonal issues and all this, like, all these other consequences in the last two podcasts. But if you looked at the people that generally have those issues, there's either two things. They either just don't know any better. Maybe they had a coach or something, and that's not, I can't necessarily blame them because they may have just been following instruction. But on the other side, they may have known that they didn't feel very good, and they may have been doing too much, and they may have been hurting themselves, but they kept doing it. You know what I mean? They kept. Mm-hmm. That's why I had made a post recently and said most of the hormonal and type of irregularities and stuff we see in a lot of these people a lot of them stem from deeply rooted psychological issues. So is that you kind of see where I'm going with that type of person? Those are the types of people that are generally going to get into trouble here. with just doing too much.
Mhm.
So that's like an introduction to that's basically an introduction to where this kind of all where it all starts. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it seems that it stands to reason that, I don't know if go as far as to say disorder, but something like OCD or something like narcissism, things like that. It's kind of an easy match for bodybuilding because of the structure,
Right.
and because of the results and the desired results. The need for focus on myself, or whoever that person is, in order to build up their body and really kind of just obsess on it, right? To a
Right.
very large degree, if you're going to get the kind of results that you're looking for. So it seems like a natural step for people with those proclivities or those disorders. And of course, like anything else, it can be taken too far. They can get too deep into something. And of course, if something doesn't work out, then what happens because if you put all your eggs in that basket, your entire world is about to collapse, because everything that you've obsessed on and focused on, you're not getting the results that you want. So obviously there can be some pretty negative manifestations there if one's not careful with their own psychology.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. You make a great point. So those people that have those underlying psychological issues, you might not consider narcissism on the same playing field as clinical depression, but really, I mean, it could be, right?
Sure.
I mean, it could be just as controlling or more,
Right.
so it's just not maybe not like diagnosed the same or as commonly, but yeah, those folks are going to generally be under the mindset of more is better. We do more, we work harder, we do more, we do, whether it be like I do more cardio to get leaner, or I, take more of these supplements to get better, or I eat less food to get leaner, or I eat more food to get bigger. And it's like an absolute thing, right? There's no gray, there's no middle ground. It's more of whatever I'm doing is better.
Yes.
Right.
And there's no middle ground there at all. There's no like, well, my body's beat up and I need to rest, or or none of that. That stuff doesn't really come into their mind, because that would mean taking a break, and breaks are for quitters. And, we can't be doing that. So, I would even say myself personally that I've fallen into that to some extent in my earlier years, because I'd had some issues that basically stem from just doing too much. Right. And, I don't want to say it was like entirely a lack of knowledge, because I knew at the time maybe this is a bit too much, but I also was just too hardcore, or whatever you want to call it, to just not push through it. Right. No pain, no gain, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also some other things that I think will play into this that aren't directly related to just doing too much of something. It's also how you perceive something. So like a behavior that's unhealthy, it's really all how you perceive it. And then also like, how does it affect your life and other people? So let's say, for example, you measure your food. Okay. Right. Common one. Or going to the gym is a priority for you. And that's something that you're going to prioritize above some other things on your schedule. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you might have people that are like, whoa, there's something wrong with you. You weigh your food? Like, what? You know what I mean? Like so now you think, oh, well, maybe there is something wrong with me. You know what I mean? And you don't, and even though it wasn't giving you any problems before, you're kind of just listening to these, maybe listening to these people that are, maybe they don't understand it, or they are, dare I say, they might be jealous, or, whatever.
Right.
But I've seen that one a lot too, where generally good people, like my clients, that they have families and stuff, and they take care of their families, and they're just good people. They're not being like a crazy narcissist where they're like neglecting their spouse and not, you know what I mean? Like, or anything like that. It's just, they get up early, they prep their meals, they do their thing, they take, you know what I mean? It's like they don't let that really affect their lives. But for whatever reason, the people around them just are constantly berating them with this negativity, right? And so they start thinking, oh, there's something wrong with me. Like this is such an unhealthy behavior. I'm like, well, is it unhealthy behavior, or are you just in an unhealthy, unsupportive environment?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's not, and as a coach, it's not my business to be like, tell someone that their wife or husband is, you know, is stepping out of line. Like I'm not going to get in the middle of something like that. But, you know, at the same time, I feel like sometimes these people they do go about things correctly, and they do manage, they aren't doing anything else in their life. They're not doing something so extreme that it's affecting their life or negatively affecting their health or anything like that. They just like the lifestyle, and they do it, and they enjoy it, and they get something out of it, right? They're doing it because they get something out of it themselves. But yet they still have a spouse or a family member or whatever that's just very, very negative about it. And sometimes that turns it into a behavior, right? It wasn't a bad behavior, but now it's a bad behavior because the people around them say it is.
Which sucks, because you're not really looking at yourself and like that this is actually a positive behavior. Like you should be looking at the other person and looking at what they're doing in their life before you're judging yourself on that, you know?
No, you're right. And there's normally a reason that the person's saying those things to you. I mean, they have something going on where they're uncomfortable, or they've got something that they're not talking about, you know, whatever it is. Right. So I think an important thing is how you perceive an issue, because if we look at anyone that accomplishes anything, there's some sense of an unbalance there. What you would balance, like this word balance is like, I think it's such a stupid word, because really balance is kind of in the eye of the beholder, right? How, like, my sense of balance is I can function as a human being and do all my stuff and blah, blah, blah. And my sense of balance is going to be way more lopsided than somebody else. You know, the other person's balance could be like, oh, you know, I weighed chicken on a scale the other day. Something's wrong with me. Right. And I'm like, well, you know, I do it all the time. It's not a big deal. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, you know, I've done it for so long, you know, done things like that for so long too, that I could literally go to a family function and bring a scale and weigh something on the scale, and it wouldn't feel weird to me. Now, I'm not saying I do that, but I'm saying I could, right? Because I'm not going to feel like, oh, wow, you know, I'm better than them, or I won't feel deprived because I'm doing it. I choose to do something, right? I'm choosing to do something. I'm not worried about like, you know, hey, they're eating cake and I'm not eating cake. I'm not worried about that. That stuff doesn't really affect me. And it's going to affect some people, and those people are going to feel and it normally affects them the most, because people are like, hey, you want some of this cake? You can't have this cake. Right. You know, it's like, well, you know, and a lot of the time people act like that because, like I said, they don't understand it, or they're jealous, or something, or whatever. Like, we do the same thing. We're all guilty of it. We're all guilty of poking fun, or, you know, it's something we don't understand. We've all done it. Mm-hmm. We don't always realize that we do it, but it's just weird to us because it's just not like what we do, right? So I think it's important to just keep an open mind about how you perceive the situation. So always make sure that everything you're doing is not neglecting your life. It's not neglecting your job. It's not like, you know what I mean? Nothing like that. And if you can honestly say that what you're doing is not hurting you, it's not hurting others, then what's the problem? You know what I mean? Like, is there a problem, or do you just have a lot of negative people around you that really have some problems of their own, maybe?
Yeah. Right. And that's what you're basically dealing with, I think, when you talk about the negativity coming from those around. When someone's trying to better themselves and put some focus into that, there's definitely like an element of jealousy, I guess. But the people who are spewing that negativity, just like in most things in life, are the ones who actually have the issue, and they are projecting those issues onto the person they see trying to improve, because it comes back to, misery loves company, and there are a lot of negativity in general loves company. It spreads like wildfire. Usually it spreads faster than positivity. And so I don't know, just by the nature of the negative energy, I guess you could say, it just seems like it spreads more easily and more quickly than anything positive. So when someone's trying to make those gains, they're trying to make those moves toward a better lifestyle, then the other person around them might think, well, I don't have the time, the energy, or the desire to do the same thing, and he's gonna or she's gonna end up looking better than me. And so the wheels start turning, and they try to hold that person back. And that on top of all of everything else that the person who's trying to better themselves, we come back around to stress. I'm sure today's conversation is going to land there as well, as one of the consequences of fitness. The people, you say as a coach, you don't really coach about the interpersonal relationships of your clients, but man, to some degree, it's bound to come up, right? Like, you almost have to be somewhat of a life coach too, because bodybuilding and fitness is a lifestyle. It's not just necessarily a hobby. It's something that you actually, you shape your life around this thing, and your relationships are bound to come into play at some point, right?
Oh, 100%. I couldn't even count the number of times that conversations come up in an email update or something from a client. Like,
yeah,
my husband is, I'm just using an arbitrary example. My husband is very negative lately. He doesn't like what I'm doing. He doesn't approve of it. I'm like, okay, well, are you following the plan? Cool. What else what else is going on? Are you still doing the things around the house that you would normally do? Are you still like paying attention to your husband, right? Like you were before? Are you treating your husband differently now? Well, no, I don't think so. Well, then I said, unfortunately, I think there's a problem maybe with how your husband's perceiving the situation and not you. You know what I mean? But it can go the other way too. Don't get me wrong. Like sometimes I'm like, you're being an asshole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we've got to fix that. I mean, you can't do that. That would be like, that would be like me going back to the family situation. And now I have my food, but I'm also like criticizing my family because they don't do what I do or whatever, which I tell you that I'm never going to do that to somebody, because I just don't care. I just don't care what they do. Like if they don't care what I do and I don't care what they do, everyone just kind of, everyone's happy. Like, just don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal,
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal. Like and anymore. And it's like every year older I get, the less I just care about what people are doing, and because it just doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not that worried about it. So like the jealousy thing, yeah, I mean, everyone, I think that's a natural human trait, is their jealousy, right? So that can pop up over somebody's doing something that you want to be able to do, but you're not there, right? So, I mean, there are things that I'm certainly jealous of that I might not necessarily have control over, but yeah, I'm not going to go poke fun at somebody because I look a certain way or they don't, or I'm a bodybuilder, and they're not a bodybuilder, they're just a peasant, right? And like, it's like,
but some people do though, right? I mean, some people, they get that mindset to where they become so structured and so focused on what they're doing, they feel like everybody else should too. And so they may get a little condescending in that regard.
They can't. Oh yeah, it is
something to watch for, a possible consequence at least.
I think judgment's in there somewhere too. Like even if you don't want to judge other people, when you have that kind of a lifestyle and you see somebody else who, weighs 400 pounds or something like that, it's a mind thing. It's like you can't even control the fact that you're judging somebody for the way they look compared to you.
Sure.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is, because you automatically, when you fix your eyes on somebody, you're going to have an instant analysis of that person, right?
Right.
It's an automatic thing. Doesn't matter if you know them or not, or you know anything about them, you have an automatic analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so yeah, it is a natural thing that happens. And don't get me wrong, like I don't approve of what some people do. Like I don't approve of being morbidly obese. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna sit there and tell someone that it's okay, right? But I'm also not going to sit there and tell a bodybuilder that it's okay to like abuse themselves with copious amounts of, drugs or something like that, if they're doing it or not taking care of themselves. Like I'm not, you can't be condescending, you know what I mean? Like you can't be hypocritical either.
Sure.
So yeah, don't be judgmental. You have to be fair with people. Now, if somebody's going to come at me and start giving me shit about something, I might bark back a little bit at them, but it's not because I care. It's more like I get enjoyment out of that, kind of, But
if you got to fire back, that's a whole different story. I mean,
yeah, that is a different topic, but yeah, that is one thing that I do see is the relationship burden, right? The relationship burden, family, friends, all that stuff. And I will tell you that I'm kind of introverted. I'm very good with people. Like I can sit and talk, right? We talk on podcasts. I'm not shy. I speak at seminars in front of tons of people. We can talk. Like I'm fine with all of that, but I much prefer to be kind of introverted on a normal basis. You know what I mean? So, I'm not like out in some like super duper crazy social setting where it's like I couldn't do what I want to do, but at the same time, I can accomplish anything. Like I can hang out with a friend, I can do something with my wife. Like none of that stuff, none of what I'm doing really affects any of that. And at the same time, if it's a situation where I can't eat off my plan or whatever, like they're cool with it. If I am like 2 weeks out from a show, they don't care. You know what I mean? Because I'm still there. I'm still present. It's not any different. The funniest thing to me about that whole thing is like, does it really matter if you aren't eating the same thing? Like that is really what's, you know what I mean? Like that's really what's the deterrent in your situation here is he's eating this food and you're eating that food. And that bothers you that much that you can't talk and just, you can't have your normal function because this person's eating chicken and this person's eating, whatever, I don't know, whatever they're eating, fried chicken. You know what I mean? That's so funny to me that people can let something so silly like that get in between them. But yeah, that's an absolute consequence for sure. Happens all the time. It's a normal thing, especially for people that are introducing this into their life at a later stage in their life because they're already like very established. A lot of them have a spouse, maybe they may have children, they may have relationships formed, they have a job that's more established, right? They're not like a college student or whatever that's still figuring things out. So you do have that. Now, there are a lot of other specific issues that can form along the way that are more a result of like the OCD, and stuff like that we were kind of talking about previously. Eating disorders are super common in this industry. People don't talk about it a lot, but they're all over the place. I guarantee you that. I can guarantee you that. And it can be, we could say eating disorders or just anything that results from body dysmorphia, right? Which that could be. So it's a combination of eating disorder plus overexercising disorder, right?
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what have we done here? We've essentially established, when we talked about this before, we essentially established a bar that's pretty high for us now. Like we want to look, you know what I mean? Like we want to look a certain way. And this is even worse for people that have competed before and they've achieved that like contest condition, well, I hate to break it to you, but you're not going to look like that all the time.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? It's not going to happen. So we've set this bar really, really high, and genuinely people are just afraid that they'll regress. Like magically, if they eat a little more food, that they're just going to blow up and be, a blimp or something and just lose everything that they've worked for, when really what happens is they restrict for so long that when they finally do they're basically forced to eat more and exercise less, they do blow up because they've established all of these like dysfunctional hormones and digestion and all these things that we were talking about before. So of course, yeah, they're going to gain fat back. Like their body's been basically starved for forever, instead of just kind of like having periods of eating more and eating less along the way and doing it in proper time increments and things like that. They could have basically avoided all of that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And of course they can form. Well, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of eating disorders too, I mean, we talk about like the restricting, but anyone who's not actively like trying to immensely bulk up and they're taking in the amount of calories that, 6,000, 8,000, whatever calories that you're going to take, that's overeating, right? And the body is not used to a normal, everyday body is not used to trying to take in that many calories. And if they do, then that's probably where the morbidly obese, that kind of dysfunction would come in as well. So, that's another, I guess I wanted to bring that up because restricting and overeating it kind of goes with the lifestyle, right? At least for if you're competing, especially.
That's everything, right? You're doing one of two things most of the time. You're either restricting or you're overeating. You're eating in a calorie surplus or you're restricting food. And that's pretty much what you do 90% of the time. You're doing one or the other. But doing one or the other for too long of a period of time or something like that could obviously be problematic, right? Now, what we end up running into with the eating disorders is a couple different things. So the obvious one would be undereating, would be like, we're talking like forms of anorexia and things like that, because just extreme restrictions from fear of getting fat, right? And you will see a lot of people with anorexia that do gravitate towards bodybuilding. And I've seen a lot of them actually do really well, like eat more and gain muscle and gain some fat back. And they look really good. And they obviously just gaining the weight back improve their health. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see some people that didn't have that to start with, and they end up kind of forming it later. Right. Now, what you probably see more often in bodybuilding would be over-exercising, because most bodybuilders know I got to eat a certain amount of protein. I've got to eat, this and this. So yeah, they might restrict because they're eating too low of calories. Like it's going to be, tends to be more common in females. Like they'll go super duper low calories, but they'll still eat. They're not completely starving because they still know they got to get their protein in, right? They got to, so they're still eating something. They're not full on going like days without food, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what they're doing to compensate is they're doing copious amounts of activity. So it could be cardio, like they could literally be on like a stepper, treadmill, or running, or doing something where they're literally just like burning calories. Or the kind of the hot thing now is using the step trackers, right? Like your smart watches and stuff, because it track steps. But the thing is, they're like, well, I'm not doing cardio. I'm like, yeah, but you're doing like 30,000 steps a day. Right. You know what I mean? I'm like, how are you doing that many steps? Like, well, I walk around town all night, to get them done. I'm like, well, that's a problem. You know what I mean? Like, like you're intentionally, I'm saying, yeah, you're not walking on a treadmill, but you're intentionally increasing your activity level to compensate for what you feel is going to make you fat. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So their body compensates the same way. It still forms those hormonal adaptions and all that stuff we talked about. Like restriction, your body's going to pretty much pick up on restriction one way or another. If it's too much exercise or too low of food or whatever, or it could be training, right? You could be training for too long. They train 7 days a week, and they lots of volume, tons of sets in the gym. Their workouts are really, they don't even rest between sets. They're doing like, super sets and circuits and shit the whole time, which, by the way, if you're listening to this, you're probably completely wasting your time, because none of it's effective, because you're not using any, like, you don't rest and you're not using any weight.
Right.
Like not enough, you know what I mean? Like you're literally just burning calories, so yeah, they figure out some way to basically do more of something or do less of something to give them the result they want. So that is either an eating disorder or it is disordered thinking or behavior in some way, right? The second one would be binge eating disorder. And this is pretty common. This is pretty common in bodybuilding. So my mom or my wife, they both work in like the psych / developmental disabilities field. They were talking about it. Like they just added binge eating. This was a few years ago. They added binge eating disorder to the diagnostic manual for like, for disorders. And it might have been 5 years, how time goes, but it was within the last 10 years. We'll say that.
It was roughly about 6 to 7 years ago now, but
probably tack a couple extra on there because I'm probably wrong. But they added that to the manual, BED, BED, binge eating disorder. And that's probably outside of like the restrictive or over exercising. That's your next most common that you're going to see. Now, that's an interesting one because that one's kind of unsuspecting because you wouldn't think that people would binge eat when they were trying to, attain some type of like physique goal. The problem is most of the time they never intended to do it anyhow. They have basically driven their body into the ground so badly that every time they taste food or anything palatable or they get around food or they do anything, that their body's just screaming for them to eat. It's like, you've got to feed us. We need food. It's like, we need body fat. We need something, help. You know what I mean? And anyone that's had binge eating disorder or binge eating episodes, they know what it feels like. It is and I've had the feelings before, like after extreme preps and stuff. And I kind of get them. I kind of get those almost every time after a prep, like that feeling where my body is like, hey, get us out of here. We do not like this, And anymore these days, I kind of ramp up out of a contest prep pretty quickly because I'm just like going slow, just kind of drags that process out for me. So I kind of ramp up quicker and it gets me kind of out of that state. But anyhow, you'll feel these feelings where you can't quench it. It's insane. Like you could feel like your stomach is like going to just burst and you just cannot stop eating. And this isn't a willpower thing. So like, I kind of giggle when people online are like, oh, you binge eat because you don't, you have no willpower. I'm like, look, nobody sits there and stuffs themselves to the point of like feeling like they need to go get their stomach pumped and go to the hospital because they don't have any willpower. Like That's not, and some of the stuff people binge on isn't like palatable stuff. Like we're not talking they're binging on sweets and things. They do, right? That happens. More palatable stuff's going to be a little bit more common to binge on. But dude, they'll binge on bodybuilding stuff. Like I've seen people binge on plain, like nothing, like nasty, dry ass chicken, whatever. I've seen people binge on raw potatoes, completely raw, which is like absolutely disgusting. You cannot sit here and tell me that you would binge on a raw potato willingly.
Right.
Just like, no, I don't know anyone. I mean, maybe somebody likes raw potatoes. I personally don't know anyone that does. but my point is like, these people aren't even always binging on palatable things. They're just binging on normal stuff that they might eat on a regular basis, rice cakes or rice or potatoes or oats or chicken or beef or, or whatever. I don't even know, whatever people eat. And it's not a willpower thing. It's a hormonal and hunger signaling to your brain is completely whacked out so badly that you've created this behavior. And now you have two things. It's a behavioral issue where there's normally triggers, right? There's normally like people binge eat like a certain time of day, or they'll binge eat like certain foods or after like a certain meal or at night or, whenever. So you have like a behavioral thing that's habitual, and it's also hormonal because your body's kind of whacked out. And unfortunately, it can go on for a really long time. So even when people regain the fat that they may have needed to function, they might still have binge eating disorder, because now it's like a habit. Now it's like every day. And it's a really bizarre thing. Like, I've had a couple people, we've talked about it more in depth, and they're like, man, I would go home and I would be scared to even just go home and be by myself, because I know I couldn't stop eating. Like, I couldn't like stop myself from eating. Like, I had to leave the house until it was like late, and I was so tired that I just had to go home and fall asleep.
Wow.
So it can get pretty extreme, and it's all that just because they wanted to live a lifestyle that they was supposed to be healthier.
When you went through that, what was your food of choice?
So I'll be honest, and when I feel that type of thing, I pretty much just start increasing my calories on my plan right away. If I'm coming out of a contest, because here's the thing. If I just try to hold my calories down to compensate for like overeating, it's kind of pointless.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And mentally, and I do that with clients too, mentally, if we're like after a fat loss phase, or after a contest prep or something where they're leaner and their body's been underfed, I'm like, look, there's no point in us eating this like bird food here, this tiny bit of food, when you're just going to overeat anyhow. We might as well increase your plan, and you're also going to feel better because you're not cheating on your plan now. You're not, right? Mm-hmm. You're not like mad at yourself because you're overeating. You're just following your plan. So you feel better about it. So that's kind of what I do most of the time, is I'll just come out of that situation much faster, just because, like I said, you're just going to feel better about it. You're not going to feel like you cheated or did something wrong. And that's what drives, guilt is not what you want when you have an eating disorder going on. You know what I mean? Like, so, so binge eating disorder, very common in this industry, very common in, I can say very common, but it's relatively common in like especially like my female population and stuff, where they're dealing with a lot of those issues that we've talked about in the other podcasts. It's not uncommon that they've had periods of binging. For some of them, it will last a very long time, or maybe become a permanent behavior until they get some help. For others, it can eventually go away, but by the time it goes away, they've regained twice as much fat as they had when they started. You know what I mean? So they're like, I've seen crazy overshooting, and there's actually studies on this, like overshooting your body fat set points. If you started your fat loss journey at 150 pounds, a woman, and she ends up at 120 pounds, and then she binge eats and she ends up at 160 later. You know what I mean? Like, she's effectively reversed everything plus added 10 more.
Right.
So, that's not good. It's not a good, it's not a good situation.
Yeah. So you have folks who come into bodybuilding with these pre-existing conditions, such as eating disorders, such as anything from self-esteem issues, anxiety, depression, things like that. And obviously obsessive compulsive disorders, one we talked about. Obviously the bodybuilding fitness, if not done correctly, appropriately, if not managed well, I guess, can have negative effects on those pre-existing conditions. Do otherwise normally well-compensated people, in your experience, people who are otherwise mentally healthy, have a pretty good constitution about them, do they ever get into the bodybuilding lifestyle and come out worse for the wear because of, they slide into these obsessions or the eating disorders? I think would probably be, like you said, probably the most common thing for people who are otherwise healthy, to kind of slide into that negative disposition after they started bodybuilding. Do you find that otherwise healthy people, back to my original question, end up worse because they didn't manage their bodybuilding lifestyle well?
Yeah, it can happen. I think some of it may be like poor direction. They have maybe, and that's a common one. And this isn't me bashing anyone or marketing for anyone or anything. It's just literally saying, like, people get really bad advice, and they might be they never intended for that to happen. And I've even had people that I've start working with later that have these disordered eating, and they have the hormonal adaptions and all this stuff we talked about. And they're like, man, I'm so mad at myself that I let this happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm so frustrated, because they're not stupid people. They're intelligent. They're intelligent people. Like, I was just following my coach, right? I just wanted to keep competing because my friends were competing, or I did the same 2 shows every year and we did it over and over, or whatever, and they're just mad. They're frustrated that they got to such a bad position. Because, I mean, let's be honest, most of the time, if there's a problem, we don't realize there's a problem until there's a big problem.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's difficult. It's a lot easier for me to be preventative towards these things, because I know what I'm looking for. You know what I mean? These people don't know. They're new, right? They're following direction and stuff. They don't know that there's going to be issues like that unless they have good direction. They're just they end up way down the line. They end up having all kinds of problems because they get to a point where they're like, well, this definitely isn't right. This definitely is not how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And if they never had anyone, along the way, kind of help them prevent those things, or take precautionary measures, or establish like healthy habits and stuff like that, then they might be screwed. I mean, they're just like really far gone.
I think also though that things they come out of nowhere so often. I think that being mindful,
sure.
practicing mindfulness to some degree or another is important, just so you make sure you're checking in with yourself. Like for instance, I've had, I don't use it a whole lot, but sometimes I use some stimulant pre-workout, and I've got to be careful because I've triggered some anxiety before that came out of nowhere, which then in turn triggered some anger that I became pretty angry all of a sudden. And it literally came out of left field. I was hungry too after my workout. And that's a whole other element of the story, because I went to Jack in the Box and they really, really made me angry, and I'll never go back to that Jack in the Box again.
They screwed up my order.
Well, they wouldn't even serve me. I walked inside and they decided they were just going to run the drive-through because I don't know, they were getting too busy or something. I was the only person literally standing there, and I was starving, and I was hangry, and I was anxious, and I became angry. And it literally, it sounds kind of silly, but this came out of left field, and so I have to make sure that I manage myself a little differently, because it was very uncomfortable being in that situation. Like the way that I felt like I was going to jump out of my skin, right? And I don't get really anxious very often, but sometimes I do. And so I've got to kind of make sure that I'm managing myself in a way to where I don't trigger that kind of anxiety. I can imagine that there's a lot of different things that people just in general, whether it is self-esteem issues or whether it's an eating disorder or maybe even depression, that if you're not checking in with yourself and managing yourself, fitness can actually kind of turn against you in some ways.
A lot of ways there. I can sit here and name a bunch of them. You get on the scale. You don't like what you see on the scale in the morning. Boom.
Right.
Whole day shot, right? We haven't even stepped out the front door yet.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It could be anything like that. Slipped up on my diet, right? Pissed all day long, even though we could have. So we probably go and do something stupid instead of playing damage control or getting back on track. We probably do more stuff because we're mad, and it just makes it worse.
Yeah.
Right. You could think of a ton of like small examples like this, because they expect a lot of themselves and they're managing a lot of variables. So, their work schedule goes off, they miss a meal, mood shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole day shot. So like, these are things as a coach that when they tell me these things and I'm like reading an email or something, like, well, they're pissed. You know what I mean? Like they're upset, right?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's fine. And you have to understand that by flying off the handle or creating all this anxiety or, ruining your mood, you're doing so much more damage than, whatever else happened. The best possible thing we can do is regroup and let it roll off your shoulders, like being able to roll with the punches, you know what I mean? And just being adaptable. And those are skills that you get along the way. I think you may figure out tips and tricks and stuff, but yeah, man, there's a million and one things during the day that could go wrong. That, man, if they're not on your plan, if that wasn't, because these people that are type A have a plan, their whole day should run according to their expectations. And if it doesn't, we've got a problem, and their whole day is going to be just shot. Now let's do that. Let's do that a few times a week for 12 months, and let's see how stressed out your body is. That's all that added stress that you didn't have before you started, measuring your food and bringing your meals and doing all that stuff. You've added way more stress to your life that you didn't have before.
Right.
So yeah, that's a good point. And that's why kind of a good final point, I guess, would be one of the things I do with a lot of people that are newer, that have never competed before, or they have history of any eating disorder or addiction, or just anyone, like even just like the normal, the person that's in good health and in good state of mind, like you mentioned. I do this with most people, is that if they take interest in wanting to compete, or they have any type of more extreme goal where they want to get really big, or they want to, get really lean, or whatever it is, I always make sure that they go through cycles of, I want you to know what it feels like to eat more food, to eat less food. I want you to know what it feels like to do this, to train hard, to do cardio, live this lifestyle. And I want you to know how you react psychologically and manage all that stuff. I want to go through like a couple cycles of this up and down, and make sure that you can handle it before and gets a little bit of experience with it before you go and do anything extreme. One of the biggest things I see fail is these people that have big weight loss, and they go right into competing. They're like, I've lost 70 pounds. I'm doing really good. My coach says I'm ready to compete. They go lose another 20 to 30 pounds to do their first contest. I'm going to tell you what, after that contest, they are lost, because all they've ever known is weight loss. And they used to be really overweight. So you want to talk about someone that's afraid to eat after the show.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's your person right there. That's the person that's going to end up with eating disorders, or the person that when they do regain some fat back, they're going to freak out. So what are they going to do when they freak out? Time to compete again.
Yep.
Right back into the show. They're doing it a few months later, or 5 months later, 6 months later, and they just keep doing it over and over again until it doesn't work anymore, and they've got all these other, all the 101 hormonal adaptions that we talked about on the previous shows. And it's all because they wanted to lose body fat, not be obese anymore. And now they've got a boatload of problems and an eating disorder. There's their gift. And they didn't even, it's like, here you go. This is what you got to show for all your hard work. And sometimes I feel bad, because like I said, they get bad direction, and they had good intentions, and they work really hard, and they, because that's the message out there, right? Work hard, just keep grinding, never give up, always strive for your goals. And I'm like, what if your goal is wrong?
Or what if you reach the goal, and then now what goal do you go for now, or do you try to is your goal stay where you are,
Right. What are you going to do? What are you going to do after your goal's over? You got to realize that there's everything you do there is a consequence or a reaction or a result from this that is going to, bleed into the next thing you do. There's nothing happens in isolation. You're not going to lose a whole bunch of body fat and not have to do something afterwards to maintain a good result or come out of that deprived state or something. So that's why when I'm coaching someone, I'm always thinking about here's what we want to accomplish, but how can we do it in the best way that they're still going to be in a pretty good position after it's all done? Or what are we going to do after it's all done to, better set them up? Kind of like the people I talk about going through the cycles, right? Because I know if we can do that, they're going to be okay in that post-contest situation, right? They're going to be good. Like we've established a good base. They kind of know what's up. They're going to listen to me. They're going to come out of it okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they're not going to hate bodybuilding when it's done. Cause you've got all these other people that had those bad experiences and the bodybuilding's the devil and da. I'm like, nah, it's really just your actions. You just didn't do it right. It's not your fault maybe because you had a coach or whatever, but that's just what happens,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you brought it up. You brought up the term, the magic term that has popped up all 3 episodes so far, and that's stress, and what stress does to the body by the very nature of working out, of exercising and lifting heavy weights. You're increasing your body's stress, exponentially, and on top of the other things, the demands, and trying to fit your gym time into your schedule, and managing relationships, and like you were saying earlier, managing your food, and trying to meal plan and sticking to it, and all just it's a lot of stress that's added just by trying to be healthier, and so it's very, very important that we find ways to manage that stress, especially because, once again, the nature of the exercise itself is stressful on the body. And when you talk about like we have in the first 2 episodes, the hormonal changes that happen when the stress hormone is introduced into the body, you start with the cortisol, and then everything else starts going haywire, right? So we've got to be careful with that. And stress is always going to be there when it comes to exercise. It's always going to be there. So it's something that has to be managed. It can't be ignored or forgotten about, and that's why I guess rest is so important. Getting sleep. That's gonna compound the consequences of those things if we don't manage ourselves properly, right? I mean, we always have to account for that stress being there.
Yep. I use and I didn't coin this. It was actually somebody I do a podcast with. And we were talking about this. It was like a bank. He used this example, which I like. It was a bank account, and you have stress. You have stress tokens you can withdraw from your bank account. But if you don't deposit any stress tokens back in, that's
right.
And I kind of always tell people, the more demand you put on the body, or the harder you push your body, the harder you have to recover. Right? You have to you can't just train more or do more of something or eat less food or something else without giving your body some kind of positive input coming back and to recover. So like I said, you nailed it. It's like you're doing something that's intended to be positive, but you have to understand that there are checks and balances here. We have to balance all the systems, and exercising is a stress. Worrying about how the heck you're going to plan and make all your food is a stress. Meal prepping is a stress. Why? Because it's kind of a pain in the ass, and you're basically doing all this stuff on top of your normal daily tasks. And most people already have a bunch of them. And, and most of the people that want to bodybuild or want to do or get more into fitness, they're already largely more driven people. So guess what? They naturally have more stuff on their plate than most other people. My business guy and I'm giving you a more extreme example, but my business guy owns his own company or whatever, that works 70 hours a week. He wants to work out and compete in bodybuilding.
Right. Of course.
Like, well, I'm not going to say that it's impossible, but you're going to have to understand that we're going to have to structure things in order to still allow you to sleep and, and recover and all that. So yeah, to your point, exactly. We have to manage, it's all stress. Everything's stress. We have to manage the total amount of stress that is put on our body. If we do not, you will have consequences. You cannot avoid them. Your body is way smarter than you are. It will adapt in ways that you can't even imagine, you know?
Yeah. And so
that's a good take home.
Yeah. So, and to be fair, and in closing, there are a lot of good consequences, a lot of good results to fitness and bodybuilding, exercise, of course, and that's why we do it, right?
Oh, yeah.
But those are I think those are the results that we focus on mostly, and oftentimes people in general might gloss over some of the negative potential effects, some of the negative potential consequences of fitness. And so I think that's one reason why it's such an important topic and such an important thing for people to think about, because if you don't, like, if it doesn't cross your mind, like it did with me with that little anxiety spell I had that night, if it's not in my radar to think about in the first place, if something doesn't happen in the first place, typically, then I'm not going to think about it. So I'm not going to take the time or take the measures to avoid those consequences. So just kind of hearing about it, thinking about it, and then managing yourself so that you don't have to face those negative consequences it's a good thing to do. You should
It's
take some time to work on those things.
It's like the when people say just eat less and move more, and you'd be in better shape. I'm like, oh, here we go. I said, yep, on paper, you need to eat less and move more. You are 100% correct. But I said, you've got to be a little more specific than that. Like, yeah, because your average person is going to eat way too less,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They're not going to adhere in the whole number of problems. So yeah, that's some good closing points. It's a little more, it's more about just giving the body the right amount of stimulus to get what you want, and just not too much stimulus. And it can take a trained person to help you, or it can take maybe you just messing up a few times to figure it out. I mean, heck, that's how I learned most stuff, just screwing up on myself. And now I can help other people not screw up as much on their own selves.
Right.
Okay. Yep.
Well, Austin, we appreciate you coming on with us, man. This has been a good time. It was a very well-rounded conversation, and I think they tied in nicely. After it was all said and done. Colt and I were wondering how you were going to tie these together, and you tied it with a nice, neat, pretty bow. How the body and the mind, and the chemicals and everything that's going on inside of us, how they all kind of connect, and how to take better care of ourselves, and what things to look for, what kind of signs and red flags to look for, and how to go about starting to fix them, at least, how to repair the body and the mind through all this, which is super important. So we really appreciate your expertise, man. We're going to keep following you around on the socials and stay in touch for sure.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we're also going to point all of our listeners and anybody within our social media grasp to Austin Stout. So definitely go check him out, follow him around. You can only be improved by anything that he says or anything that he shows you. So thanks again, Austin. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
We are officially out.